Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us on Food for Thought. Again, this is Sunil Chandy. I am the priest and rector here at Christ Episcopal Church, and this is a ministry out of Christ Episcopal Church, Food for Thought. And we thank you for being with us today. This is a pre-recorded session. It is a session that we will air at a later time than today, and it follows the common. And we're going to be talking to, of course, our own Sharon Younkin, who will help us with this wonderful topic that we have, which is common themes during this holiday season, challenges for our children and the importance of grieving and mourning. And so without very much else, let's bring Sharon on board and let's talk about this interesting and powerful subject. Hi, Sharon. How are you doing?
Father Sunil.
So
good to see you.
It's so good to see you, Sharon. So, and then I love the greens behind you. I think I don't have any greens behind me. I only have the stained glass window. But those greens just remind us of this holiday season, as we prepare for the Christmas time, and then after that, New Year's Day, and then moving on. And in this particular time, there are a lot of people in our community that suffer. Usually we think of it as a time of joy and hope and of connection and family, but there are people who are suffering. And today we want to talk about two groups of those, two subsects of our whole community: the children, and then also people who are mourning.
Yes.
The loss of loved ones.
Yes. The loss of loved ones, the loss of life as they knew it to be, the loss of, a huge theme during the pandemic has been loss, and on a lot of different levels, which is connected to why our children are struggling also. So those themes are all connected. Yes. And so I thought this was interesting to me. So starting with the children, I received this, fall of 2021, Blue Cross Blue Shield pamphlet.
Yeah.
And really striking to me is they have a big article on protecting your kids' mental health. Now, to me, that says, wow, there's something, insurance companies tend to have their finger on the pulse in terms of what's going on because they're paying for it.
Yeah.
And right. And I also, it's consistent with what I've been hearing, what I've been reading, which is, again, that children are folks who are aged, 6 to 24 have really suffered during the pandemic. And so, and our rates of depression and anxiety have doubled.
Wow.
And so the need has doubled. And anyway, so just briefly, Dr. Horowitz, Karen Horowitz, who is the chief medical officer at Bradley Hospital, which is a children's hospital for psychiatric challenges up in East Providence in Rhode Island, talks about how kids are dealing with family stress, school stress, loneliness, worries about getting sick, and loss. They've lost time in school, friendships, and maybe even family members. So there's that whole theme of loss and grieving and mourning. And I think, of course, it's overwhelming to our children. And we as adults struggle with how to grieve and how to mourn, which is why I thought that topic would be helpful today. She says that everyone feels sad and worried sometimes. However, if that sadness or worry is affecting your child's ability to function, that's a sign they need help. Some clues to look for: changes in sleep, loss of appetite or overeating, grade slipping, and anger or irritability that's out of character. So then skip down to, I thought this was interesting. She recommended a lot of the themes that you and I have recommended and focused on throughout our collaboration with the pandemic. She talks about this whole idea of self-care for the whole family. And remember, we've talked about the fundamentals of emotional well-being. The number one thing I tell everyone is to get a good night's sleep. I totally agree. Sleep is the most important regulator. So if you can work on focusing on that, everyone's moods will be better. It's also important to get outside. I tell kids and their families to work to spend 20 minutes a day outdoors. So that whole idea of exercise is really key. She goes on to say it's helped her and her family get through COVID. Eating balanced meals, again, nutrition, because what we eat affects our brain and the health of our brain. Avoiding mood-altering drugs are also key for mental and physical health. She also talks about spending less time on social media, especially for kids because of cyberbullying. The rate of depression for teenage girls over the last few years and social media, the rate of depression for teenage girls has significantly gone up. She claims social media may be the reason why. And then lastly, suggests doing one activity a day that makes you feel confident, capable, and accomplished. That could be anything from making a new recipe to writing in a journal to checking in on a loved one. You and your child can do that individually or together. So we'll pause here, but.
No, I love that. I love that. Engaging in one activity, that was the last one, right?
Yes.
I was trying to make a list for myself.
Mm-hmm. Engaging in one activity a day that makes you feel confident, capable, and accomplished. That's how you build confidence, setting doable goals, and completing them. And that's how people, and also giving yourself credit for completing those goals. That's how people build gradually, more self-esteem and confidence. Mm-hmm. And so to remember too that we have there are crisis resources for kids. Kids Link Rhode Island, which has a number 855-543-5465. And there's also the National Crisis Line, 1-800-273-TALK.
Maybe we could get Ben or Dave to put the number and the website up for us as well.
Kids Link Rhode Island, yep. 855-543-5465. And then our National Crisis Line, 1-800-273-TALK. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I've mentioned before, we have something called behavioral. A behavioral link, that's actually for adults. Let me just mention for resources for adults, because parents may be suffering too. If behavioral health link is our state emergency room for mental health. And so you can always reach out to them. I think they have 24-hour crisis line too. And then RICBT, we see children and adults. So should we transition now to the grief and mourning, you think? Or do you want to say more about this, our children?
I'd love to tell you anecdotally. I see that in our community, there have been a number of kids that I know are struggling with mental health issues. I mean, part of it is, and I hear it from some of our folks who are grandparents. Their kids are seem to be anxious about the future. They're worried about, they just seem worried in a way that's not helpful. I mean, worries almost never helpful, but this idea that some of them, I've been hearing about panic attacks for kids, and they're acting out loud. And then I got to kind of see, I've got to wonder whether some of this the conversation around kids wearing masks in school, and what that means to these parents. I mean, it may mean, wearing the masks in school might just remind people of the anxious moment that we're in. It might also, there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, it's so large.
It is. I hope that the adults are so distracted by so many things right now, distracted by politics, distracted by, issues around masks, around vaccinations, around, and I just hope we are not forgetting our kids.
Yeah.
And to remember, right now, one of the stressors for families during the holidays, I'm running into this repeatedly. Some family members are vaccinated and some family members are not vaccinated. Yeah. And there's this whole thing about how to get together and how to get together safely, and people getting upset with each other, and people, and these are all themes that you and I have talked about, which is the whole idea too of deep listening. And you're not going to get anywhere by shaming people or, getting into these. I think it's a matter of trying to hear what different folks have to say. But in the meantime, I think the children are getting lost in the shuffle a bit. I mean, we're having a hard time understanding all of the controversy that we're seeing. And so imagine how they must be feeling. And I think it's important to keep perspective and to remember what the priority really is. Is it about being righteous about something, or is it about trying to be effective and help people? Everyone's struggling, everyone's suffering through this. Let's try to help each other and be effective in how we do this.
Yeah.
No.
And some of the things that you've actually, outlined that I wrote down on this list that gave us balanced meal, self-care, emotional, watching out for your emotional health, and sleeping a good night, and getting outside and outdoors, and spend less time on social media. It doesn't seem like these are, things that require a great deal of effort, or even like out of the box thinking. It's like going back to the basics. Going back to the basics of exercise, eating right, sleeping, and going outside. That's all of these things, and just connecting with people on a personal level, and not just staying on the social media aspect of it. I think this is, when people are coming across this with this, the anxieties that our kids might be having, and maybe the depression, maybe not being able to get out of the room, and they're thinking it might require some heroic effort, or maybe it might be just as simply as going back to the basics.
Yeah, I often emphasize the fundamentals. I often talk about that. It doesn't make sense for me to spend hours and hours of time listening to, if there are things that can be done, if it's more that a person's sleep deprived, they're sleep deprived, and they therefore have a negative lens through which they're seeing everything, and their thoughts are distorted. Well, yeah, we can talk about the thought distortions, but even better, if we can help you to help your sleep, then the thought distortions may not even be there, because the person is not sleep deprived. So I always like to address the fundamentals of emotional well-being. That's always a strong part of my treatment plan with the folks that I work with. Right. Always, yeah.
And I think, like from my aspect, from the church's aspect, just helping people to kind of come back to prayer, maybe even the kids to know that there's a larger thing than just their anxieties and their fears that's in the world. Just the idea that there is a God, from my point of view, and sharing that point of view with them, saying that we can be secure even in the lessons that we're learning from this.
Yes.
I think one of the the silver lining out of this whole COVID crisis, that I think is that more and more people are taking to heart, is the fact that we need to talk. We need to speak out. We need to talk with someone, and therapy is an important thing, and being able to kind of articulate what we're feeling, and demystifying it. If we're noticing that the rates of anxiety and depression are increasing, that means that somebody's measuring that, and then that also means that there's, if you're measuring that, then somebody is thinking about this as something real and not as something superfluous or, like something that's in your mind that doesn't exist,
Oh, it definitely exists. I'm seeing it now in the insurance literature. I'm hearing stories, of shortages with provide care because there's
Yeah.
such a need. I'm reading statistics. This is real. This is real. What's happening right now? This
Yeah.
is what we had. One of my concerns. We were very concerned. The initial effect of the pandemic, and I think these are now the secondary effects that are
Yeah.
starting to happen. Yeah. So the other thing I want to say, Father Sunil, too, is we have an old adage kind of in my field: anxious parents, anxious children. So if your child is really struggling, you may want to also ask if there's something you need to be doing as well, because they model themselves after you. And how are
Yeah.
you doing with all of this? How are you using coping skills? Do you need more support around that? Because the wonderful thing about all of this is that there are wonderful tools you can learn and ways to cope, and anxiety and depression are treatable. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'll tell you, my sons, when I was in college, I didn't really go to the counselors, and my parents were not, you know, talk therapy and counseling and therapy were, you know, were kind of like alien to them. And so, like when I was in school, I didn't engage in any of in conversations that might help to kind of clarify my thoughts and feelings and my hopes and dreams and the ways that I suffer and find joy. But over the years, I've learned that, and so now my kids are readily more. Daniel, my son's speaks to a therapist every day. I mean, that's good. Or every week. I mean, every week. And then there's another two sons who just go to college and they go to the counseling center, especially as they deal with exams and demands on them, and as they try to cope with this COVID situation.
yeah, I think that's wonderful. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
You and I have been very open and upfront about that. I have, in addition to working as in the field for close to 30 years, I guess, I have also worked very hard on myself. And, so I've been on both sides of the desk.
Yeah.
Because I believe that you really need to in order to understand this process and how it works. And I think, you make a commitment to a lifestyle change. You make a commitment that you want to, and like you, I had the generation before me. Some people were more open-minded, but some were not. And, but you're forging your way out there. And the tools, I am so depending on a lot of the tools that I teach and that I've learned during this time. And so I think it's an excellent opportunity.
Yes, and it helps to build up our overall resilience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, this is the COVID situation is a situation that is so that has debilitated many of us. But then it's also a situation that we could kind of find ways to be more resilient and that helps us not only through this challenge but any future challenges.
Yes, absolutely. I read another article, and you and I have talked quite a bit about resilience and, what are the factors that go into it, working on yourself to grow. How can I learn from this? What's the meaning I can take from the struggle? Reaching out for connection. All of these things help you to be more resilient. I also read an article the other day that mentioned humor. And I know I loved that because I do think, that's one of the things I really love about working with you too, is I know you have a good sense of humor. And so humor is really important too, as all these things. And so So what do you think we talk a little bit about the grief and the mourning piece?
Let's do that. I think we have about 10 more minutes. So
Okay. So let's do that, because I think this is myself included. I tend to, we always want to sort of like look at the positive, look at the positive, look at the positive. However, we can't really get to that place
yeah.
unless we allow for the grief and the mourning. And so typically over the years, I will hear people say, well, I know there's no right way to grieve, and I agree with that sentiment. I think there's no right way to feel when you're grieving. People can feel all sorts of things. However, sometimes people will say that and they will not, it's used almost as a way to kind of avoid dealing with the grief. And I just want to make sure, if there's no progression after 20 years, 25 years, any emotion that we have, the intention of the emotion, you have to think about it. The function of any emotion that we have has been to help us survive.
Yeah.
To help us survive. So it's not in our best interest for survival if we are grieving and not functioning for years and years. Even depression has the function that we take a step back, we figure out, we kind of recalculate what's going on, we figure out how to move forward, and then we go back out and we move forward. So every emotion has a function that it serves. So how can we do this? How can we grieve and mourn? You and I talked a little bit about this earlier, is that mourning is actually a very active process. So grieving would be the internal experience you have, the internal feelings you have about your loss, whether it's losing a loved one or all of the loss we're experiencing during the pandemic, loss of social experiences, relationships, so many losses. And then the mourning is actually it's the active part of grief. It's how we express it. It's how the actions we take so that we can integrate the grief and we can move forward with our life. We can, work through this. So there are 6 needs of mourning, according to Alan Wolfelt, which I'd recommend. He has his doctorate in, I believe, death counseling, and has written many books. This is a nice short one on coping with anticipatory grief. And he talks about 6 needs for mourning. So the first is to acknowledge the reality that you are grieving. We have to label it first, and that this is a loss. So that's always a first step. And sometimes you may have to do it in small steps, to acknowledge it, let it in, and then distract. I often think about challenging emotion is like a seesaw. As a child, remember, let in a little bit of the grief and distract, let in a little bit and distract. So to try to keep a balanced way of moving forward. The second is to embrace both the pain and the joy of the grief. So there may be times when you have different emotions. There is no right way to feel when you grieve. And so sometimes you could feel really sad. And so other times maybe you feel relief. There are all sorts of emotion you may experience. And actively and intentionally express your grief for a few minutes or an hour, then give yourself a break. Go do something fun, relaxing, restful, or distracting. That's another misconception I'll see. Sometimes folks think they have to just stay in the grief. I just have to stew in the grief and feel the suffering for years. I literally have seen this, right? Or just totally not deal with it at all. Don't think about it. Explore memories associated with the love or attachment you're losing. So I thought this was really beautiful. Listen to this line. I've learned that it's essential to listen to the music of the past, to sing in the present, and dance into the future.
I like that.
Right? Meaning sometimes with grief, you have to go backwards before you can go forward. You have to reminisce. You have to maybe look at photos or, remember stories. Even when I think about students grieving not having a graduation ceremony or grieving things like that, going through, remembering things about school, remembering things that are meaningful to you, looking at photos rather than just, oh, I'm just not going to think about it. Just move on. Sometimes that's important, an important part of processing that, integrating that you're not going to maybe have that big event that you were looking forward to having before you can move forward and focus on a new way of looking at things. So that's how we as human beings make sense of our lives. We recall and tell stories.
Yes.
Which memories stand out? What will you miss the most? What will you miss the least? Tell the stories to others and write some of them down if you want.
Yeah. I think it's so beautiful. I just want to make sure, did we get through all the lists, or is
hold on, let me do. He does state, and I agree with him, that if you have traumatic memories, that's more safely done in the presence of a therapist. So number 4, develop a new self-identity. The mourning need is largely forward-looking. When you work on step 3, you look to the past. When you work on step 4, you look to the future. Change is often both a loss and an opportunity, even if it's an opportunity you would never willingly have chosen. So mourning is a future, is past as well as future. And I think some people think of it as just staying in the past. Try asking yourself these questions. What have I always wanted to do or be but never got around to? What's on my bucket list? When I imagine myself at the end of my life, what will I most regret not having done? How can I build more mindful presence into my life? Number 5, search for meaning. Explore a sense of meaning and purpose in terms of in what ways was the love or attachment that is coming to a close part of that meaning? How will you build meaning into your life from this day on? And then number 6, last one, reach out for and accept support from others. He makes the really fascinating point that mourning is outward, which involves other people, and that's why funerals are so important, because we're talking about our grief in the company of others. And actually, in terms of search for meaning, how could I forget this one, Father Sunil? I'm going back to step 5, and then we can talk more. I always encourage grieving people to prioritize their spiritual needs and make time to get in touch with their spirituality each and every day. What this looks like for you will depend on your habits and beliefs, but the bottom line is that it means doing something that nurtures your divine spark, that still small voice inside you that whispers to you about what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. Your daily spiritual habits might include prayer, meditation, reading a spiritual text, yoga, communing with your garden or nature, contemplative walking, or getting lost in an activity that makes you feel deeply alive.
Oh, I love that. I think I'm going to pick up that book.
Right? I mean, it's a tiny little book, and it is so chock full.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, as you were talking about this, about grief and mourning, and I was thinking about in the Bible, Jesus comes and visits with Lazarus. There's in the Gospel of John, Lazarus was a good friend of Jesus, and he and his sisters were almost as if they're best friends with Jesus and his company, and they were among the disciples of Jesus. And what happened was, Jesus is away with the other disciples, and while he's away, Lazarus has an illness and immediately dies. And so Jesus is told about him, and then he rushes to get there. And then but by that time, Lazarus is already dead and gone. And there was this moment where Jesus, in the gospel, Jesus realizes that he is dead, and when they tell him, and he weeps. It says it's a really an interesting, in the Gospel of John. It's just one of the shortest verses that they have in the gospel. Jesus wept. and it was this outward expression of the deep inner grief that he was feeling, this grief that this is a man that was connected and attached to him, and there's a deep love and affection for him, and then the idea that connection is somehow broken, and then to express the sorrow, to express it by weeping. It was and so it had to be a powerful event where, everybody is watching this. And then as Jesus wept, he almost says, this is how you do it, right? Because this is our example.
Yeah, he didn't go off in another room and cry quietly.
Right. It was public. It was, and it wasn't meant to be public so that he would show others, but it was just a natural expression of of being confronted with this information. So this idea of not trying to hide it, suppress it, or repress it in any way, but letting it go. And then what the next step he does is, then the next step is the miracle of the healing, to say, what's next? Well, how do we move forward through these issues?
Right.
I'm thinking about this this morning. I went to give communion to one of my parishioners, and lovely lady, and she just lost her husband. This is the first holiday that she's going to have without her husband, and her husband and her have been married for over 70 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and the first thing, and she turns to me, goes like this: will the pain ever go away? And I, to tell you the truth, I had to be as honest as I could possibly. I could only be honest, right? I could have said, yes, time will take away the pain, but I don't believe that. I really don't. I believe, even now, after my father's death over 30 years ago, there's still a part of me that feels that pain, but I do think over time, as we learn to express that pain, and I think that's mourning, powerful mourning, not to remain in it, but express it, then becomes where the pain can be managed. Somehow the pain is always there, I think, for me, but it's how I manage it, how I take that pain and make it into a positive or experience for me, in such the way, I could talk about my dad, and I could talk about the lessons he taught me, his sense of humor, his way to be resilient as he faced the many different challenges in his life. And I pass on that information to my kids and my family.
Right.
And I lift it up, and then all of a sudden the pain, that sorrow, it's still there, but it's managed in a way that's different.
Yeah. It's transformed.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think that and I think and it sounds like you did that by taking a lot of meaning. How would you integrate kind of what his life meant for you, and how do you move forward, finding purpose in that, and how that also becomes part of your identity as you move forward too, maybe thinking about lessons that he shared with you. And I think the whole idea too of sharing with others, which is step number 6, that whole, there's so many ways we can do that too, like support groups. If you're really feeling, there's no one who understands better what that's like than other people who've been through that kind of loss.
One of the most powerful things, and I think that the author just suggested this about the funerals. One of the most powerful things I found in funerals, that when we haven't been able to do, was, we haven't been able to, because of these funerals, once we've done them, when we've gone through the liturgical experience, there's always a gathering afterwards, of family and friends. And what you do, and I always say, in those during the sermons or during the services, I always tell the family or the people who are gathered, please come and tell the family the stories, share stories of joy and hope, of connection, so that they could all, we're collectively expressing this mourning, but this grief, but we're also kind of affirming each other,
Yeah.
laughing with each other.
That's beautiful. Right. I think a funeral in and of itself, a wake and a funeral include all of these steps, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
And that's why it's such a powerful ritual and tradition to have to help people with this process of healing and mourning and healing ultimately.
Yeah. And at the end of it, you kind of feel as if there's one step closer to kind of moving forward in some direction.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting because exactly. Like I think if you really mourn with intention, which is an interesting term that he uses in this too, like mourning with intention, by knowing these steps and what you can actively do, I think it's a very hopeful process. Like with this woman, who has this tremendous loss that you're talking about, of course, like a 70-year relationship. I mean, that's a huge loss. However, mourning with intention, I think, can really help to generate some hope in the process too.
So here's the thing with the because sometimes you get these messages from outside in the world that says, okay, you should be done with this.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to do this? What's the next step for you? And then you have these expectations, and not everybody is ready.
Yeah.
So this woman, it was just beautiful. It goes like this, I was dreading this Christmas, but we put up a Christmas tree. I put up a Christmas tree this year.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to put it up. She said, honestly, I didn't want to put it up, but we put it up. And I said, yes, it's beautiful. And then she imagined that her husband was with her, directing her to say, look, honey, we need to put up a Christmas tree.
Right. That's so beautiful. I think that's definitely an example of the mourning that we're talking about. And what courage that took for her to do that.
Oh my God. It just, when we face grief, right, we sometimes don't even want to get out of bed.
Very true.
We just want to, and when we lost a loved one, we want to feel like we just don't want to exist sometimes. And the very fact of just getting up out of bed and then going downstairs, taking the boxes out or getting the tree and putting it together, it takes enormous courage and effort.
It really does. It really does.
And so, I love the thing. I think you said something like it's a list. It's like this reaffirmation that you're moving something forward. I put up the Christmas tree today.
Yes. I think that's very powerful. It's a very powerful example of active mourning.
Yeah.
She could have very easily not even gotten out of bed.
Yeah.
And though that's very painful, I'm sure that was it was a very bittersweet moment, a very painful moment. But like anything, I think the short-term facing, it's like short-term pain, that's going to be longer though. That's a different scenario. But, by facing things and taking these small steps and facing them, that's going to help her process in the long run be more bearable.
Yeah.
Than if she just didn't even want to do anything about it and just totally shut down. So,
I love what you were talking about, and embedded in what you were saying is being honest, facing reality in front of you.
Yes. And knowing that you don't, if it's very super painful, which sometimes it can be, you have a community there to do it with you. Oh, I know. Another thing he said in this book, which I thought was really interesting. He said, keep reaching out to people. He said that you'll have about a third of your family and friends who will be supportive, a third who will be neutral, and a third who just can't deal with it. So that if you get some people who can't deal with it, that's okay. But if you keep, reaching out, you will find your crew, you will find your group. And I think also within that third would be definitely folks who are in a support group also who really understand where you're coming from. but it's okay. You need to express to others and have that. You need to have that community, and you also have like something like a church. That's a wonderful community for something like this.
Amen.
Yeah.
I love my crew, and that I love the fact that you're part of it.
Oh, I know you're part of my community, Father Sunil. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. During the
Yeah.
pandemic, in all seriousness, like you having that connection with you has been really something that's helped with my mourning, I guess, in dealing with the pandemic and moving forward in a way of having meaning and seeing hope and how to get through this and how to grieve the losses we've all experienced. You've been actually a really important part of my mourning when I think about it.
No,
Yeah.
same here. You and I think also the people that we're reaching through this program is doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yes, we are all connected together. We're all helping each other with this. And I think, yes, I think that's exactly what we've been doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've been talking and grieving and expressing and mourning and finding hope.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sharon, I just love talking with you, but our time is
Yes.
12 minutes over.
Oh no.
Okay.
Sorry, Dave.
Well, thank you again for being
Yes.
with us. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you soon. All right. Sharon Younkin, she's amazing, and I'm grateful to God for that God has allowed her has included her as part of the crew here at Christ Church, and so what a blessing. Now is our time to end with a prayer. This is a prayer adapted from one written by Thomas Brown of Maine. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Jesus Christ, you traveled through towns and villages, curing every disease and illness. At your command, the sick were made well. Come to our aid now in the midst of the global spread of the coronavirus. Heal those who are sick with the virus. May they regain their strength and health through quality medical care. Heal us from our fear, which prevents nations from working together and neighbors from helping one another. Be present with those in authority who are making hard decisions. Support the medical professionals, emergency responders, counselors, and caregivers. We ask this all in your name, Jesus. Amen. Join with me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Friends, go in peace to love and serve God. Spread the light of Christ and the light of hope to the world around you. The world needs it right now.
Thanks for watching. Did you know that you can join Christ Church from anywhere in the world? If you're feeling connected to what we're doing, email us today at communicate@christchurchwesterly.org.